Welcome, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us on the Decod3rs Live today. You know, we have a great guest today. I'm really excited about this live too. Kevin DeGods is with us, but the man doesn't need introduction. You know him, I know him, everyone knows him. So let me talk to you about Decod3rs first. So, this channel is what we are doing with the channel, basically. Like, this channel is the first decentralized and community-owned YouTube channel. So, what does that mean? Basically, every time you watch a video, you will get reward for it. So, what we do is we produce a video, you watch it, we're gonna mint the thumbnail and raffle it. If you win it, you will get the ownership of the video and a portion of its revenue. So by doing that, we will align the financial incentive between content creators and their communities. And this channel is basically the proof of that hypothesis. So if you want to know more about the project, watch the introduction video on the channel. Follow us on Twitter to get to follow the news and the upcoming mint. And the most important thing, subscribe to this channel because the mint will be for subscribers only. That's all I had to tell you about Decod3rs. Let's welcome Kevin and start the show. Welcome, boss. How are you doing, man?
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me, dude. I'm excited to be here.
No, it's great. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. I know you're quite a busy man right now and flying all around the world, visiting other places.
Heading to LA here just after the show, and then
nice.
Be in Korea mid of the week, and then Miami after that. So we got a whole couple weeks of good travel running into folders and team events and a bunch of stuff.
That's great, man. It's always good to visit the world before taking over, right?
We're working on it.
Yeah, wonderful. So first question, man, how was your 2022 and what's going to be your focus for 2023?
Yeah, so 2022, it was me sort of shifting from my sort of full-time Web2 job into full-time Web3, coming up with the idea to sort of bring Dust Labs out of the sort of D Labs universe. And so basically making that an independent sort of company. And then just doing a lot of, I would say, setting the groundwork. A lot of what we did in 2022, clearly the success of DeGods, the launch of Utes, and then the launch of Dust Labs, sort of set up the foundation of what we hope will, be even more in 2023 and really be able to take all of those projects, including Dust, to the next level. I think if you think back to, where we were this time last year, right? DeGods was sort of, the floor price was, essentially as low as it ever been. It was down below mint at the point. And, things were really just getting started. And now, you sort of see where things have come a year from now. It's crazy to think that's only been 1 year, right?
This is the most crazy thing, to be able to acknowledge it's just been a year. It's madness. It's again, you are a Silicon Valley guy, so you know all of that ecosystem, and that's why I want to talk to you about specifically about that on that show. It's going even faster that almost any big companies that took off and become a unicorn from the last 10 years, like Airbnb, Uber, etc. And we can see that with DeGods, right? And Dust Lab in general.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Again, it's early, right? I think when I think about what we've achieved so far, it's always you underestimate what you can do in that year and then overestimate what you can do in 5 or 10. And I think, or the reverse of that, right? But the idea is really just thinking about what are the assets that we have today. And I think a big part of that is this dedicated community. And I think, doing podcasts like this or videos, and I think your new project, which is pretty exciting, and thinking about how Decod3rs, there's just so many pieces building around this ecosystem that to me says that nobody's really figured out the ultimate product market fit. But I think we found a fit inside the community. We found slices of success for different pieces. But I think the real madness will come as we start to see more of these things actually scale and have time to find their own legs, right? Because I think if you look individually at any one aspect of, whether it's NFT or Web3 or crypto in general, even crypto itself, broadly speaking, 10, 12, max 15 years old. And, if you think of NFTs, 3-4 years old, right? As you think back to like CryptoKitties in that first wave in like 2017, where the notion of like things on chain started to come out in terms of, outside of just tokens, but actually having more metadata and the richness of what we have today. And so I think the use cases are far from figured out. And I think the community, product fit or community market fit is there. I think there's clearly people that are interested and people that are learning and building. And now it's to see what are the real world applications that actually scale, right? I think we've seen a lot of great experiments. I think, this last week with Yuga and Sewer Pass and like the Donkey Dash game, I think it's pretty incredible, right? Like to see the interest around that and how like viral that's got with what arguably is still a relatively small audience, right? It's not in this internet web 2 where there's millions of people. It's, thousands, that's right? And to me, that's pretty cool, right? When you think about the opportunity that's ahead of us, is that we're still in the like hundreds and thousands phase, and in some cases, the hundreds of thousands. But most of these are far from the true like million sort of opportunity. And for us, especially as we've announced on Christmas, the move to ETH and Polygon for the youth side, is the number of brands that I've connected with and the team's connected with over just the last 2 weeks alone, just since this year started, really understanding. And these were companies that made bets on Web3 in 2022. And as you talk to them about what their expectations are and what they're hoping to do, again, still super nascent, right? Like it's still a small part of the current strategy, but a much larger part of the vision, right? And I think when you look at that and you're like, wow, you've got these big businesses that have only started to shift into that. I think just the opportunity is way higher in the future than it is what we've seen 100%. So far.
Yeah, 100%. And like, what's the scale of time? Like, how many years do we need to establish the blueprint for NFTs project, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, again, the community aspect of NFTs, I think has found, and you think of the strongest projects today broadly across Web3 on NFTs have strong communities, right? Yeah. Like we talk about utility, we talk about whether there's a business or what are they building or what are the aspects. But if you think about the ones that are the strongest today, they're rooted in the holders in the community around them, right? Because again, that is the conviction that is the most evident today. And I think what, I would say is like, how many years does it take to see other product market fits where it's not just community, there's other things that start to scale and get wide adoption, right? We've seen small use cases of, again, hundreds or thousands that are not community based. And I think for us, it's really, when I look at it, it's like the avenue of taking this into like large Web 2, financial websites, large Web 2, gambling or sports, fashion, right? I was talking to a woman in the fashion industry this morning about like, what brands and how are people building and how are they connecting? Again, it's still definitely in the experimentation phase. And so like to figure out like how many years, like my sense, I guess I'll define it this way. Like in 2022, we clearly, in 21, for that matter, we found NFTs found fit around community. Okay. And those are the strongest ones. And my view is in 2023, we'll be able to look back and you think things like Zed Run or like, what like Aaron and those guys are doing with these stables or, on the sort of Solana version of that, right? I think, you start to look at like these horse racing games and like, again, it's game, but it's community, right? People are talking about them building them. We look through 23, a lot of these games will come out, right? If you think of Yuga and the example, right? Like what they launched was Sewer Pass. Gabe was saying like, this is like a 2 of a 10 in terms of complexity. It's a browser-based game, like relatively simple from like the game bar, but like incredible from a virality and sort of interest and now imagine once they've had the time to build a proper, AAA game, this takes years, right? And I think a lot of games have been built and invested in over the last 2 years that will start to launch in 23. So I think gaming could be where we start to see, examples of NFTs finding, expanded fit outside of community. I think also, again, we've talked about like ticketing, whether it's for musicians, sports, concerts, et cetera, and artists, and how do you get music and that sort of tied into a place? I think there will be examples of that start at scale. Like we're working with a project called Coda, Kids of the Apocalypse. They're launching soon. And again, first time to sort of pre-save a song, like in Spotify, tied to the, their process of managing the whitelist. Again, small examples. We start small, but I think these are going to be examples where we start to see these scale over 2023. And then as you stretch that a little farther and say, well, are there businesses that can be built solely around the NFT notion? And if you think of Yuga, right, like Yuga's launched, across all their collections, 180, 200,000 NFTs at this point, right? If you add up all the different pieces, still relatively small, right? It's like, they're like,
it's nothing.
But it's like a couple 100,000 NFTs. It's not millions, right? Now, there's examples on Polygon that I've got to learn about recently where there are millions of NFTs that have been created around gaming, artifact things and games and that.
Right?
But I don't think those have reached the level of awareness that and the level of exposure that I think we're going to see in 23. So again, my sense is that the businesses that we see built and the use cases that we see sort of find fit over this year will expand from where we were in 22. But I would imagine at the end of this year, and if we run this back next year this time, we will still be able to be like, wow, there's still a bunch of new ones that haven't been figured out. And we'll start to see the seeds of those get planted in 23 that'll produce results in 24, 25, et cetera.
Yeah, so basically we are talking about a decade of like, we try some shit and we try some new shit. Like basically, that's what happened with like the PayPal mafia. So for the audience, like are not familiar with like the startup world, like the PayPal mafia, like group of entrepreneurs, like hundred of entrepreneurs that went from PayPal to create like all of the ecosystem that you can find right now in the Silicon Valley and above. And same thing for Y Combinator too, right? Like you have those two groups of like big entrepreneurs that work together. That's honestly like what I would like to see like Dust Lab to do with the NFTs world, right? And that's basically the direction you're taking with like your launchpad when you're gonna like incubate like a project, NFT project, etc., to take you to better and at a bigger scale than anything that we have seen so far. So that model, if we can do that, like it's gonna be a nice wave for the next 10 years, man.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. And the 10 years is the number I like to use too, just because it sort of sets it out where it's like, look, we've got a ways to go and this is not a short path. And so when I think back 20 years ago, you walk down Main Street, nobody used the internet or cell phones in their business. 10 years ago, all businesses have some aspect of internet or cell phone weaved into their business, right? 10 years ago, nobody used social media in their business. They existed, but it wasn't popular. Today, almost every business uses social media somewhere, and whether that's running Facebook ads or using Twitter or YouTube or something else. And if you think back today, 10 years from now, we'll walk down Main Street, and our belief at Dust Labs and broadly at D Labs is that all businesses will have some aspect of crypto, Web3, or whatever new names we come up with a decade from now, right? And that'll be whether it's for, again, inventory tracking, communications, marketing, finance, some kind of decentralized nature. And again, what blockchain they use and what aspects of it they use will be there. Our view is that they won't use it the way we use it today, which is wallets and like very, almost programmer-like interfaces into like some of these, applications today. They're going to use web SaaS apps. Just like if you go into a business today and ask them how they use Facebook ads or how they use email, they pop up a website, right, where they're working in some application that helps them do that. But I think of the nature, and I think what you're doing here with the show and Decod3rs is like the incentive alignment in Web3 is incredible. It's massive, right? Yeah, and if you can take something like today, I launched a Facebook ad for my business, and I was talking to a gentleman yesterday on Spaces, and he was like, "Yeah, my dad's like IT. I think it's like an IT consulting business, and was confused on like IT. How does that apply to his business, and how would like NFTs or it's like, well, you use Facebook ads to advertise your business or some kind of basic advertising in the paper or something. Just imagine that everybody that clicked on it, everybody that interacted with that could have small incentives to share it, small incentives to connect, right? And so I think for us, you take something like Etsy, right? Incredible like marketplace, right? Where it's a centralized sort of fee model. And you move that to a model where, if we were to relaunch Etsy as a marketplace, like let's just take that, for example, of Utes or DeGods, and anybody that was building stuff around Utes or DeGods could put themselves on that marketplace. And again, allow them to sort of participate in the community, get a global share, but then get their own share back to themselves in terms of how that worked would be pretty amazing, right? Same thing if you think
that would be pretty amazing.
could you
right.
launch like a Web3 version of Product Hunt, right? And like there is a crypto Product Hunt, but again, it's much more of a, it's launching in the sense that they're launching things that are tied to crypto or Web3. It's not directly connecting those incentives back, right? Like what if like, you know, Dust Labs was to launch something where everybody that builds something that's a product can launch it on our version of like what looks like Product Hunt. But then as they do that, you know, the users of the token Dust could then, you know, vote on which ones they want, and then they could participate in that economy. So again, you take whatever payment you want for the service, right? You don't have to charge in the token, you charge in USDC or whatever your local currency is. And then a percentage of that gets kicked back and sort of market buys the token as a way to sort of feed the community. And then that community then again builds an audience over time, right? And so I think if you take a look at the Web2 apps that are out there today, and then imagine like, what would this look like if incentives were aligned, right? And shared more equally, right? Where today, if you look at Uber, right? There's a great company called Teleport. They're like in a portfolio that we're in the same investor with Foundation Capital, and they're building Uber on the blockchain, right? So pretty amazing, right? Now they've taken that centralized kind of communication piece that Uber that, you know, in the previous generation was only built with a centralized model, and now moving that where like it's decentralized, where groups of drivers can connect, groups of users can connect. So anybody can build an app for like ride sharing or interact with their platform, just like any set of drivers or transportation providers can interact with the provider side. But the idea of that being a network of sort of loosely connected entities can now be coordinated on the blockchain without having to have a centralized sort of like single Web2 company running it, right? And so now the options are like anybody can interface and become and build their own Uber app, right? I could build one for my school, for my town, for my company, and have it play in this broader thing and have access to all these drivers, right? So again, just the idea of reevaluating and reimagining some of the most popular companies in Web2. Again, Airbnb, you mentioned earlier, a bunch of stuff with property. Like, how do you build that in a way that becomes, you know, a little more decentralized and a little more aligned, where it's like, hey, if I'm a user of Airbnb, there's no benefit for me for booking on Airbnb 5 times in a row, right? Other than maybe my profile has 5 stars, whether I go to a hotel or not, it doesn't matter. Like if I switch to Airbnb and I switch back to hotels and switch back to Airbnb, or what if you imagine that you start to accrue points and you're like, hey, I'm now loyal to this platform, and there's an incentive that's actually aligned in a monetization way where I'm as a, you know, a really good host or a really good, you know, sort of visitor can sort of like have that working relationship where, you know, it becomes more like, so I think again, short story is that there's just a lot of things that haven't been figured out yet. And I think those will start to come out here and start to launch and get scale in 23. And obviously, but it's going to take a long time to reach that.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to be fascinating. Like, for example, to stack my utes and get a discount on Airbnb, right? That's
right. Why not, right? I mean, and again, like you think of Airbnb getting access to a utes community that's very like dedicated. There's proof of like, you know, we saw the problems with like people rent a house and they trash a house or something, right? Well, if you know, just like if I went and stayed at your house or you went and stayed at mine, like your incentive not to trash my house is pretty high because we're friends, we've connected, like we have trust. And I think a lot of times when you get to large sort of corporations, you start to lose that sort of sense of trust. And if there's an alignment that's saying like, look, you wreck this house or you cause a problem, that's going to erode trust over time in you as a sort of a customer or a client, because now you're an owner, right? You sort of have ownership. And you see this in the best communities today in Web3, where when something bad happens or something good happens, the teams and the communities rally around things together because the incentives are in line. And it's not just like, hey, protect my bags or bags. Like their incentives are earnestly aligned with what the communities that they're part of.
And like, if the community is that important and basically like DeGod, like prove it with like floor price, volume, etc., right? So how do you keep that at scale when like it's pretty easy to do that with 10,000 NFTs, right? But how do you scale that community aspect of it when you reach 10 million people?
Yeah, that is like one of the trickier questions, but I also think it's rather simple, right? If you think of millions of people interacting with something, they have choice, right? And if you have a choice to pick a product that is equally good, you know, 2 products sitting next to each other, let's just assume for matter that's the choice. And one of them has an aligned incentives where by you telling friends or you being part of it, growing that your network makes you as a holder or you as a community member stronger.
Yeah.
Are you going to pick that one, right? And I think the idea that we will see is that the underpinnings of like what we've achieved with DeGods or Utes, where there's like this very direct alignment and you're buying some art or you're, connecting with a community, and that's what drives a lot of the value and the perceived value. But now you scale that down with lots of things like the drinks that you drink, where you shop at, what you buy from, starts to become this aligned incentive where you're like, well, I'm buying for my community. And you think of it, and people are like, oh, that sounds very contrived. But if you think of back in the old days, like pre-money, right, when people were doing barter economy, and like this is going back like, hundreds of years in the history books, or 70, 80 years in some communities, you start to say like, well, wait, that was kind of how small local businesses worked. If you grew up in a small village or a fishing village and you were the fisherman, you would bring in fish and you would trade for the guy that had the fresh vegetables, and they would trade with the butcher who had, some lamb or some beef, right? Like this is just the way that communities work. And back then it was built on like the size, right? It was very small. And it was hard to scale that, right? So as companies and things got bigger, as cities got bigger, specialization became like the way that civilization evolved. And you lose some of that connection, right? And now it's like, hey, can you rebuild that connection, but with a fabric like the internet that can do things at crazy scale, right? Because today I can go put an internet ad up, Facebook, Google, Twitter, etc., that can go and bring, people from all over the world to look at my product, right? But then you have to figure out, how do you deliver that product? Is it a digital product? Is it a physical product, right? But if you can start to reimagine these networks and these connections being social and local, but also globally distributed because they're powered by whether it's the blockchain or the internet or some sort of like broader fabric. Now it's like, okay, what does that look like today? Can you rebuild that small fishing village with trade that's like disconnected and bring that specialization down? And like, we can have specializations, but also have like a global audience to sort of connect with that. And so I think, again, just new things will be figured out. But the incentive alignment is really like the simplest way to think about it, and what that brings to any sort of activity. Could be, charities, could be, any sort of not even a for-profit type thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, if you take like an example of like Web2 company, it's basically Apple, right? That one of the company that were able like to create a community around this product with like Apple fanboy that gonna camp like for hours in front of the store, etc. Right? And that's basically what you end up with when you build a community at scale of like diehard fans, right?
And I think, Frank talks a lot about Apple and Steve Jobs, the design principles behind what they do.
Makes sense.
It's just if you build a product and you have a vision and a craft for perfection, and again, when it's ready, it's done, and when it's done, it's perfect, and like that is the best thing you've ever built. And you see this in the speech, how that is. Like when they talk about this, like, Apple has this, right? Where whatever they release, there's an army of people that will just buy it, right? Like I just know that if they release a headphone, they release glasses, they release a car, like there will be a large number of people that just try it because it came from Apple, because they've built that trust in the brand over time. And I would describe the same thing if you think about the communities that people have built, and whether it's your like 1,000 true fans or a larger community. If you do something, and again, imagine the world where we have friends and family, and you do something and you share it out, your friends and family just want to try it because they trust and believe in you. And if you can scale that to a larger audience, then that's pretty magical, right? So if you think of the idea of the brand that DeGods or Utes is, and when you talk to like brands that are much larger, one of the things that a lot of them miss as they get big is that they miss that sort of community, sort of like fanboy or, nature that you call it, where like, and then if you think of that as a big business, now imagine like a local business. Like if I go down to my local, cobbler, or I go down to my local, corner store, organic market, like they don't have a way to easily activate their community, right? Where they're like, hey, we're going to do something, click a button, and then have a bunch of people show up and like turn it into a fair or something special, right? And like, they haven't built like a newsletter or a connective, right? But if you give them a simple way to really enact that community, like they can do a brand advertising in a way that just is completely uncomparable to anything that they have today. And I think one of the things that we've seen in these early sort of large brand conversations is that brands want to come in and work with, you know, brands like DeGods or brands like Utes, because to them, they don't have to do the Web3 thing of figuring out how to manage an NFT community or a floor price or whatever. They're like, no, I just want to like access that community and find some passionate people that have sort of, you know, connected to each other and get them introduced to my brand, and then also introduce their brand to that audience. But then in a sense, use that as a bootstrap their way into Web3, but also bootstrap their way into having community again, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think it's early in terms of where we are, but I do think this notion of like larger brands connecting with community and larger brands building sort of that fanboy nature around the greatest parts of their products and the greatest parts of their companies will be a theme that we see throughout 2023 and beyond scale. Because initially, like, you know, some of the best community builders, you know, end up then starting companies, right? If you look at what Mr. Beast has done, which is an absolute note, right? In terms of what he's done, he can now start businesses that say, hey, I'm going to start a food business and do a burger company. I'm going to start a candy business and do Mr. Beast's, you know, bars, right? Like those things spin out because he's built such a large following and a brand. In a sense, if he does something, there will be a large number of people that follows. Again, if it meets his standard, it's high quality, and it serves the needs of what he feels the community wants. And I think, you know, you could imagine your own community as you've built out Decod3rs over time, you'll start to gain trust in like the stuff that you do, the work that you produce. And that community will, again, you know, not only defend you online, but sort of promote you because they actually believe it's the best thing. And they believe it's aligned with them because they want to help the same
100%.
process.
Yeah. So is like the best way to build a business nowadays is like to build like a cult, like that one can call it a cult, right? With like everyone like Steve Jobs and like everyone or scale preserve, but like with Frank, etc. It's that not the end goal, or like, and if not, like what are the difference between like like building a company at that scale with that community aspect of it and like literally a cult?
Yeah, I think when you take the best aspects of a cult, it's people that are, you know, deeply aligned behind a single vision, right? And now whether that vision is incorrect or not widely approved of, like, you know, but like again, the best parts of like religion and the best parts of cults is that there's this deep belief in a greater sort of vision or future. And I think when you take that, again, what you described with Apple, and like people would describe the fanboy aspect or the cult nature of their product, or, you know, there's certain brands that have like this cult following of like, wow, like everything they do or everything they do, I just love it. I want to have it. And like, I really want to be tied to that. And I think, again, community is the root of that. And so I think a lot of the best community builders out here, whether it's on Twitter, on YouTube, and folks in our world, as they build these really strong communities, they're going to have the opportunity to monetize those in a way over time. And again, creator economy, if you think about it, the early versions of that were the platforms helping a creator monetize, right? So YouTube or Twitter or, you know, Facebook or Instagram or whatever, we're sort of paying people or having, you know, sort of advertising, sharing, you know, models with these individual creators. And I think if we can be successful, and one of the things at Dust Labs is how can we build tools? And as we think about this new accelerator, we want to find the best creators and the best founders, the best community builders, and then launch an NFT project for them that allows them to, you know, to sort of like incentivize their holders, but also really align the future things that they launch, right? And if you take that same aspect of what we're going to do with Dust Labs, is we go to these brands and say, look, we're going to provide you with the tools to make it easier for you to convert your, you know, customers and to convert your, you know, sort of loosely connected fans into something that is a much more rich and a much more passionate community. And that software should make it easy. So they're not having to spend 20 hours on Spaces. They're not having to do 10, 15, you know, podcasts a month to go and connect and do that. They actually have software. It's like, hey, how do you put those pieces that you have? You already have really good product marketing. You may already have good videos. How do you put those in a way and deliver them to your community so that they can feel connected to the brand and they can go do that work for you, right? They can go and kind of be the brand advocate or the brand ambassador of what you've done. But you need to enable them, right? And I think a lot of companies today are missing that piece, right? They send stuff out on social media, but it's a little tone deaf. and it's a little set up in a way to be more of a megaphone and not this two-way conversation where the community gives feedback. And you've seen this, right? There's beta testers and things like that where they'll have like little groups where they, focus groups and things like that. But they're always more afterthoughts. They're like, hey, we're going to go do a focus group on this thing. And it's not built natively into what they're doing every day. Where if you're actually building with your community versus building something and then giving it to the community or going to the community and asking for something back, it's a little too disconnected in that transaction. Whereas if you loop that into a model where it's like, hey, the community is building with you. As the community scales, your product scales. As your product scales, the community scales. And this thing grows together. It'll actually be a lot more effective to grow that way, a lot more aligned, right? Where you feel like you as on which side, whether you're on the community member side, you're feeling more, part of the process with building something out. And then a product or the company can feel more, closely relationship, and they actually value their community more in the sense that they've really made this like their sort of like loop.
This topic is fascinating. Like it's so
some
cool.
of the comments are great. Like if you look at the comments, like Ryan's talking about like
which one do you want to take?
How do brands build recognition? Like, is the identity? Yeah, you're throwing them up there, right? How does the identity sort of connect back? And like you have these Apple, Starbucks, Lululemon, like where they've connected what they've done, where the people like believe that they're part of the community and part of the product, right? And I think what we're thinking about with NFTs and what we're thinking about with the early stuff in Web3 is actually, like Ryan says, we're basically building a rewards fabric for that, right? What if I could go into Starbucks, and you've seen this with Odyssey, right? And that's what they're starting out to look at that model. You start to see this thing sort of feedback where they're like, wait, can we actually turn the loyalty program into something where people are even more passionate and more connected to it than just a like, hey, they're going to get points and they have some money in their wallet. They're actually starting to like really turn this into like their identity. Like I believe like, I'm going to set, my Apple, and you've seen this, right? People running the Apple sticker on their, sticking them all over their monitor, or their, or their workspace or whatever, where they just believe that deeply in the product, right? And I think if you imagine the world of like, you go into these builders, they flip up their laptop and there's 15 stickers on the back of their laptop. They actually believe in those brands. And now what if those stickers could actually reward them for that benefit? If those stickers weren't stickers, but actually an NFT, and that's their NFT portfolio on the back of their laptop. Like that could be insane, because now you're like, well, you believe enough in a brand or connected to something or a movement where you put the sticker on your laptop. But what if that sticker could actually be you holding a digital artifact or a digital collectible that actually represents your proof of kind of connection to that brand? And one of the next versions of proof of work that we're building is going to be that. It's going to allow community members to sort of like, hey, this is my proof of work for the community. Like I put a sticker on my laptop. I talked about you at a conference. I, pitched this vendor to my boss and use it now in my day job, right? Like you can think of all these levels where individuals are essentially promoting things that they like and now can actually get, correctly and intrinsically rewarded for that value. So I just think the potential here is pretty rich.
And that's what we are doing on Twitter, right? We're putting sticker of a collection in your PFP, right? It's the same model. It's exactly. No, that's fascinating. And okay, so back to the Silicon Valley and Web2 ecosystem. Obviously we saw brain and money from the Valley coming into Web3 like last year and even the year before. Do you think the Valley is leading the way into crypto and NFT again, and by the ecosystem that's been there, they're gonna win again, like the Web3, like they did in the Web2?
There's a couple things in that question. I think so. The first one is that I think last year, anybody that was starting a company or doing something wanted to put Web3. It was hot, right?
Yeah.
So everybody wanted to put Web3 on your pitch. Instead of and it was funny. I was talking to an investor over the weekend or on Friday with lunch, and he was like, 70% of the companies they invested in last year were Web3 companies. And he's like, well, they called themselves Web3 companies because whatever they had done up to that point was way cooler if they could lace in crypto or Web3, right? And I think, there's vibes to the early version of the internet were similar. Like people in the .com boom were like, oh, I'm just an internet company. Like whatever I'm doing, as long as I'm using the internet, I'm going to call myself an internet company, or find a way to do that so that I can get that name. And I think this year we're actually seeing AI take over in the last few months, where it's like, oh, I'm like ChatGPT for this, I'm doing AI for that. Like everything's AI. And so I think why Silicon Valley has advantages in user base, and broadly, with a lot of deep tech talent, stating back to like the early, microcomputers, early chips and things of that nature, the true like silicon in Silicon Valley. I do think that the cost and the difficulty to build new businesses continues to lower, right? Like in the early days of Silicon Valley, you had to be in the lab at SGI or one of these like early internet companies, working at Juniper, Cisco, working on routers, and there was very tactile and physical. I think with the internet of like, Google, Facebook, sort of the modern ones, YouTube to an extent, they became more online. And so you started to see this notion of like, and then you think of the cloud stuff with AWS, GCP, Azure. Now it's like, hey, it's pretty easy. You don't have to worry about the physical servers. You can sort of work from anywhere. COVID made a big shift towards remote, like, hey, you can be anywhere and sort of build these internet companies. I think Web3 fits a lot into that, where there will be large user bases coming from historically Silicon Valley based or Silicon Valley started companies that they can make the transition into Web3 quickly, right? Because it's like, hey, they can add that feature or that sort of capability onto an existing product or an existing large user base. But I think a lot of the innovation will come globally, where it's like there is no rules on where you have to be to code a project these days or write something. You can literally, in fact, tell ChatGPT, I want to write we were playing with it last night, I want to write an Apple Swift app. And we were seeing how far it could go to literally building me an app for the App Store. And it would, you keep asking the right questions. Cool. It wrote all the code. And then it's like, well, now I need to build the storyboard. It's like, well, you need to go download Xcode. It's like, okay, I've downloaded Xcode. Now what do I do? It's like, well, here's the different menu buttons to go through. And literally, it walked you through, and the prompt master, I think Ryan's got it right. Like you just knowing what to ask ChatGPT to go do it. So I think the view of that and the ease of hosting something today, like far beyond what cloud services. Now there's all these no code things. Now there's all these like very simple ways to launch an application. I mean, you can create an NFT with going to a website, that now may not be the best one, or you may not have built the community, but the technology to go launch a project on crypto is the bar is pretty low. Being able to have it accessible, which is one of the problems, quite frankly, because it's so low, you get a lot of noise.
Create bad actors,
But I think to your point, like the innovation, at scale, early stuff may come out of Web 2, sort of like Silicon Valley based or historically large Web 2 companies. But I think a lot of the novel stuff will come from the fringes, right? Come from different places in the world, different walks of life. People will figure out like, hey, this is something novel. And we'll see a lot of success come from historically underrepresented founders, historically underrepresented geographies, because the access, you're still going to need access to the internet, right? And so I think not going to go to the point where like, hey, it's going to go into some place where there's just no internet access. But again, Starlink's going to have that solved in a couple of years, like where there will be access anywhere. If you think of the number of cell phones today, there's 3-4 billion cell phones. So like in another 2 or 3 years, we're producing another 500 million cell phones. And as those sort of wash out and second tier ones, I send mine back for, refurb or whatever, or you trade them in, like within the next, let's call it 3 to 5 years, there will be no reason why anyone on earth can't have a cell phone and internet access, right? And so again, there's some financial aspects there, but again, in the limit, like there will be way broader access to those two things than we've had, because as it's accelerating. And so then you're like, okay, well now the world is online, right? And the world has access to sort of like internet applications, which means they have access to Web3 applications. And now founders can come from any of those areas. We're going to see a whole new set of like things go viral and a whole new set of things reach, product market fit that aren't going to be based on these big companies. Now, are there going to be technologies or underlying things that do require like tens or hundreds of like traditionally trained software engineers to sort of implement? Yes. But I don't think it's going to be the only way.
Like you can always find like three guys in the room that will code the next big thing, and like and they are
now
in
it's
Sri
three
Lanka and
guys in the
China.
tent in Antarctica, right? And that's what's kind of crazy. Like it used to be like three guys in the garage in Palo Alto. It's like, okay, you're 2 blocks from Stanford.
Been there, done that.
Now it can be like, hey, we're in, Antarctica, or we're on this like sort of like completely desolate place, or pick some very rural place, even in the North America. These are going to have access to a lot of the same tools. They can go on YouTube and learn about it. They can go on YouTube and promote it, and they can build something without a lot of friction.
I like access like the classes of UCLA online or Harvard, whatever. It's gonna be like the next 10, 30 years will be fascinating to watch. It's really exciting. And okay, so like now that we talk about like the Silicon Valley, okay, like let's go back to the DeGod execution and like the success like that you guys have. Okay, what from your perspective, like what make the DeGod collection and like the successful? Like what was like the secret sauce in a way of the team, of like the execution that make it like top one project on Sol, and gonna be the top one on ETH tomorrow.
The next phase is to go over on ETH, and honestly, the goal's always been to build the top #1 NFT community, right? And I think that is always the goal, and I think that helps, right? Because you're not done until you're the largest, the best, the #1. And so I think having that conviction early meant like every stage of success was you're still not done, right? You still are not #1, you're still the biggest. And so I think that helped, right? Having a relatively long-term vision. I think being incredibly community sort of rewards driven, like the team never took big paydays. All the money was reinvested back in, probably to a fault at some times, right? Where it was, we got really thin on capital at times. And, but that built this sort of strong community over time that allowed like it sort of crystallized or sort of galvanized the community to that strength. And then just being very transparent and open and admitting that we're wrong, admitting that we failed, admitting that we didn't do our best, and striving to always do better. That sort of like loop of like, hey, let's try to do something that breaks the internet. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try again. Oh, these experiments aren't hitting. Let's keep trying. And then that sort of relentless, just more shots on goal. And I think a lot of teams and founders, either the vision wasn't big enough, right? Where they felt, hey, I'm going to stop at this point, or would go dark and build in the cave for too long. And I think I saw this with some friends in some early startups where you spend all the time building towards that sort of initial launch, and then you launch and
nothing happens.
And then the launch doesn't go perfectly, or it doesn't work at all. And then the energy or the passion that's left is sort of been drained from the team to be able to move on. So for us, it's always like every time you do a launch, that's just the starting of the next thing. That's just you're constantly this kind of day 0, day 1 mentality of like, hey, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. Like we can work on bigger things now. And clearly now when we announce things, you have like an initial larger following and more eyes on you, but it also raises the stakes, right? It like now people expect like everything to be like this amazing break the internet thing. So at some level, like we've created this really challenging bar where like, and I think I'll be honest, like Reward Center, I think falls into that, right? Like we said, hey, we're going to do points and stack points, and this Reward Center thing is going to be amazing. And one of the reasons why we continue to wait is that we want that to be something that is so incredible that it feels like we achieved what we promised, right? And we have to convince ourselves of that, right? And so as Frank's talked about, like, well, what's the best utility of an NFT community? Well, it's to give them other NFTs that are also great, right? And so I think part of that now is like, how do we align finding the right founders and finding the right sort of communities and building that fit, right? And because it's like founder and community, we know that's when we see DeGods or Dutes, it's like, well, you have a kick-ass community that's very dedicated and very passionate and very strong, and that strong community makes the NFT strong, and then it feeds itself, right? And if you don't, and where you can launch the most amazing NFT, but if you can't build that community and that relationship behind it, today they just don't grow. Like a lot of the other utilities haven't proven to be that successful. And I think, we make the joke, or Frank says, like, hey, everybody joined the Bored Apes or bought into Bored Apes because they actually wanted the yacht club. They wanted the cool kids community.
Yeah.
What they got was a metaverse and a game. And like, while they've done great work, like there is still desire. And we believe with DeGods, we're going to keep feeding that lane, which is like build the community to be incredible and continue to scale and build that best community. Because we think that is where we've reached the most product market fit around NFTs. And part of that will be this accelerator model of bringing other founders, other creators into the fold to help them with art, help them with operations, obviously provide them with all the software they need to go build their own really strong, dedicated sort of communities that then have the NFT launched around it, right? One of the biggest fears is you see people that are getting incredible audience on Spaces, big YouTube followings, and they're like, wow, I want to get into Web3. And we talk to them and they're like, I don't know if I launch an NFT and it doesn't work, or it doesn't look good. Like, how do I get out of it? Like, and it's like, well, what if we did the reverse? What if we found the founder and find their community and then work with a plan over time to incubate that connection where we're like, now we have a founder and we have the community that's vetted and strong, and then do the NFT, right? Rather than what we ended up doing, in hard mode, for an example, with DeGods, is sort of launched the NFT and then had to like grind to find that community. You saw with Utes was like one step better, where the community with scholarships and Ute List really galvanized up front. You launched it in Utes, I would say got a 6-month head start on community building the day it launched, right? Rather than it took 6-7 months to really find our groove. Utes launched in that groove, and now you've seen that grow, and Clubs has just extended that and really pushed it to the next move. And the idea is that and again, we'll be launching applications soon, is this community piece will be the extension of what we do again. So we'll be running scholarships back, this time looking for creators and founders, finding ways for them to connect with their own communities, validating that they have sort of community market fit, and then you launch the NFT, right? And I think that, and then again, those NFTs will go back to Utes and DeGod holders, because like that is where, we will always be driving the most value of everything we do back to the holders of DeGods, right? And so that sort of like alignment is really where we feel that we can do the best, but it's also the best for our community.
Yeah, that's exactly the alignment for like the same vision like that I share for Decod3rs too. But basically like proving and showing up like I can produce good content. And in like end of Q1, early Q2, whatever, I launched the collection that will put a financial incentive to keep watching the content, etc. Right? And that's the model that I want to launch with other content creators, because the app that I'm building right now for Decod3rs, where you can see like the KPIs of the channel and build in public, I can white label that for other content creators, right? So I do that once. I show it that it works. I show it like better like retention on my video because people are watching it and they like the content. And now I can tell content creators, yeah, but bro, like it's working. If you do this, that, and that after 6 months, 1 year, whatever, then I can show you better result on your channel and grow together, right? And that's exactly the alignment of like what you're describing right now. I guess I got educated well by the DeGods team and like taking like understanding like deeply like the mindset behind that. And that's why also I was talking about the Valley, like the Silicon Valley, because the mindset, it's exactly that. Like it's the growth. It's like understanding what make a good project and execute it like perfectly. And like what I think that you think it's normal for as a Silicon Valley guys, for everyone, like 99% of the world doesn't get that because they don't grow up in that ecosystem. Like there's this environment with like you go to a coffee shop and then like everyone is like a CEO and excited by this project. And I already launched 10 startup at 15 years old. And that's our ecosystem. Like you can see it in the Web3, and that's why it works pretty well.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I think you're right. Like Web3 is designed for this model of like finding aligned incentives and building applications and use cases that continue to feed that, right? And so I think, I think it makes a bunch of sense. And I think for you, and again, much like DeGods, right? I think like DeGods and Utes were the proving ground to show that, the software that we have can actually work for these communities. And just like your platform with Decod3rs, you're like, hey, I'm going to prove that this works for videos. I'm going to prove that this works for my audience. And then hey, from that, now I can share that with others and have sort of already have the social proof, but also the production proof that it works.
Yeah, that's exactly, and yeah, we can do another show in 6 months to see what's the current status of the channel. Man, like we're running out of time already, so yeah. You will need to come back on the channel to make an episode 2, bro.
I love this.
That's great. Okay, so just like a couple of questions before we're closing up. Like, what's gonna be the KPIs, so key performance indicators of like the ETH migration for DeGod and Newts?
I think the basic one is that it works, right? So super high security, right? So you don't want to have security issues. You don't want to have like technical issues. And so I think, technical excellence, I think, and that being like essentially bug free, right? Like you don't want any, so as many edge cases that we can work out of it. I think the other one that's fun, right? Like we want it to be kind of a fun process. And we want it to be easy, right? So part of that making it fun is that it should be easy for the holders to opt into it and to sort of like, transition themselves. And then I think those are the two main ones, right? So like, getting over there without pain and having some fun. If you think of it from a, sort of like human factors. And then I think the third thing is to really see the community grow, right? And I think if you think about like, one of the driving forces around the bridge is that so DeGods has room to grow on ETH, in terms of both floor price but community, and opening itself up to a larger number of like folks that are sort of like on mainnet ETH. And then I think with Utes, the growth could be even bigger in the sense that the type of brands that we're talking to and the opportunity to connect with these large entities is something that was not, we just didn't have those connections initially on Solana. And I think so moving to Polygon, I think gives us that. And we've already seen it in the 2 weeks that I said my calendar is packed with, sort of business development type meetings. And for us, as we start to launch those partnerships and learn, right? Because again, we definitely know that we're not going to get the first one right, the second one right. Like we're going to try a bunch of different things and say, what is the right fit of how to do these? So we're talking to some brands about sponsoring clubs. There's brands that are actually building their own clubs on top of Utes, which will be pretty cool. And the benefit for them is that they don't have to take the full risk of doing something in Web3, like launching their own NFT or their own collection. They actually can connect to an existing strong community, support that strong community, bootstrap their own community off of that, and then be able to go do something more native in Web3, whether that's launching a collection or connecting it back to the way that they use Web3 in their product today. And so for us, the two KPIs around that are really around, how many brands on the Ute side do we connect with, right? And, how many brands go and sort of sponsor or become connected with both the DeGods and Utes collection. And then I think also like, how do these communities sort of grow post the bridge, right? And so for us, we want to enable growth and allow that to happen, not just in floor price, but also just in the community and the strength of the community that's around those collections. Like, how can we widen that top of funnel and attract even more, great creators, but also great holders into the brand? And part of that will be launching these, new collections through the accelerator and things of that nature.
Oh, that's amazing, man. Are you gonna to make me like migrate my DeGod through toilet pipes?
No, we're not going to do that. I think what's interesting, we've talked to a lot of companies that are building games, and I've always said, look, I think the best way to launch a game is to find one that people love to play, right? And if you think of like what the sewer pass has enabled and sort of the break the internet sort of model that they've been on for the last few days, people want to play the game and they're having fun doing it, right? And I think for us, it's like, I don't think DeGods or Utes natively is going to go launch a game, but I think what we are going to do is like, you want to start to see the DeGods and Utes PFPs, the DeGods and Utes Lightning showing up in some of the greatest games. And you want that to be a place that if there's games built and people in the Utes community or DeGods community are on teams, or they think of themselves as esports sort of like clubs, around the kind of clubs that get created. And we start to sort of build like really strong esports teams inside of the Utes community or inside of the DeGods community, or even spin off new collections that are very focused on esports or focused on gaming. I think that will be a success with the way that we're approaching it versus natively building a game ourselves at this time, right? Again, no plans to build a game, but definitely plans to integrate with a lot of the great games that are sort of come to us and a lot of the great founders. Some of those are traditional Web 2, sort of like mobile games and casual games. Some of them are more hardcore, like, competitive type games that you see from that model. But I think there's also a lot of really interesting Web3 games that are coming out. And I think by having the strong communities that both Buttes and DeGods has, it makes a ton of sense for those Web3 games to want to launch with us, or want to have, some ability for a Ute or a DeGod to participate in a greater way, whether that's early in the beta or building sort of the richness that they have in there.
Yeah, because you already have like thousands of beta testers when you launch your game or like app or whatever, or business, right? Like
they're already in the
you launch it. Yeah, no, that's wonderful, man. Future is bright, man. It's gonna be exciting.
Oh, very. Yeah. That's why you got the shades on. Mine, it's too bright where you are.
What?
That's why you have the shades on, because it's too bright.
Oh yeah. There is multiple reasons, like for the glasses. So first, okay, I prepare for the youth glasses, but also like the light around me, like I'm finding more comfortable to wear glasses. Plus, like it's Web3, blah blah blah. I don't want like security purpose stuff. I prefer to like kind of keep it that way right now. And also I do boxing, so sometimes I have black eyes, so I can hide it.
I like it. That's a multi-use case for sure. That's awesome.
Exactly. So yeah, probably gonna do a reveal at some point, because like it doesn't matter anyway, because hype. I'm gonna please subscribe if you want to see my reveal.
Doxing coming soon. Full doxing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. If you don't come to NFT Paris, I will be free docs there. But man, like I don't want to keep you like to missing for you to miss your flight. So maybe we can wrap it up here. Okay, I have a last question for you. And you get used to interviews, so I can ask you that. Maybe you're gonna be able to reply to it. What's the question like no one asked you during a podcast or an interview, but you wish they asked you?
It's funny. This question is one of the questions that I always ask salespeople at the end of the sales pitch.
That's
like,
great.
what is the question that every other people ask that what is the question I should have asked that I didn't ask?
Yeah.
And it's funny. So when I think about this, there's two. I'll be super transparent. There's two things that come to mind. Some are just deeply personal. Like, what are the personal type of questions or motivations? I think is one. And I think so. I'm going to take it two ways. So I think the personal one is like why I do this. Like why do I come to work every day? And I think a lot of it is because I enjoy it. I get deep satisfaction of work. I get satisfaction of building companies, and I think there's also, to me, it's one of the best ways to demonstrate, like, to my kids and my family, like, hey, this is what work ethic looks like. And I think when I look back at the way my dad worked and the different things that he was involved in, like, I always was inspired of like how he took his work and how he, approached it professionally, but also the type of sacrifices he made to put in the hours that he did for, what he did for work. And I think for myself, so that's one of the motivations, like, the family thing. And I think that's a question that a lot of people don't ask, is like, well, why do you do this? Or why do you do what you do? Right. And I think for me, it is a family sort of centric way, even though work, what I do takes a ton of time away from my family. I do think it shows a level of like work ethic and sort of like sort of commitment that I think is hard to deny, right? Because I'm always focused on something, and I think it's something that's valuable and put my time into it. And I think that goes for a lot of things that I'm passionate about. I sort of have this notion of being very almost obsessed with whatever I'm doing. And so it's like, hey, I'm going to go research this thing. Like, I will go overboard researching it, or hey, I'm going to go do like this little experiment, and it ends up turning into like something very large because I obsess over that thing, and whatever, walk of life it is. And then challenge myself to be better and have that sort of intrinsic sort of, push towards being better. I think the other question on a more work-related one that I think a lot of folks don't ask is like, what is the team like? And like, who are the people that, because I think Frank and I get a lot of airtime or podcast interviews, and a lot of our team is sort of, more silent. Like you don't see them. They're on Twitter and stuff like that, but they don't get the same exposure. And I think for me, one of the things that I would love to solve 2023. And this has been building businesses for 22 years. And I think in the lifetime of building businesses, it was always about like taking care of the people that worked for you and ensuring that they met their goals. And a lot of those were financial or career growth related. Hey, I want to like reach this new title. I want to reach this level. I want to become a manager. I want to become a better engineer. I want to become a better human in that sense. And there was also financial outcomes of like, hey, if we do all this together and we sell this company or reach this success, we get acquired, that will be, you will get your reward. I've evolved that thinking a little bit, especially with the Web3 and thinking about aligned incentives. And I think there's an opportunity for the individuals on our team to be able to find a way to tell their story, right? I know you're working with some of them on Decod3rs and they're part of the broader sort of thing, thinking about, hey, how can they be helpful and how can they teach others?
Yeah.
And, more of a code academy kind of model. But I do think it's an underrepresented aspect of working in Web3, especially on teams where you're not like the front person or the hype person or the one sort of is taking all the interviews and taking all the time on the time on the timeline. And I think it's an area that I want to think about more. And I think it's so like I would love for people to ask like, hey, who's our DevOps guy? Oh, this guy worked in the fucking fintech and the dude's a goat and like has set up this incredible shit. Oh, like tell me more about Chill, right? Like or tell me more about Bob, one of our tech leads that sort of runs, all of the sort of roadmap and stuff, or tell me more about Bobby who runs product, or Ralph, our designer. Like just going down where Joseph's on our color team, I'm going to start forgetting people. Matt on our front team, Leonard and Bing, our two goes from Singapore. Like it's pretty incredible that we've built.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunity for us to get more of their time out and more of their sort of like their own personal story of why they do what they do. Why did they join us on the journey? Like, because I think, you have your story of like why you joined. And I think, Joseph was doing this spaces for a while. It's like your Web 2 or Web 3 journey. It's like, how did you get to where you are now? And like, why? Right. And why do you do this? It's like at some level, it's not the most popular thing. And, there is a chance of like there's still risk in like lots of the things we do, especially small startups, in this space. So I think for me, I wish people would ask more about the team and also allow me to talk about them, but also finding ways that the team can get more time telling their own story.
Yeah, man, like I definitely intend to invite Chill and like the tech team here because I want to talk about like the technical aspect of building like the next Web3 unicorn. So that's part of the next line. So yeah, please like DM Chill and get him ready like to jump on YouTube live anytime soon.
I love it, man.
But that's happening.
You should do a panel, and you should bring up like the front end team, the back end team. You can bring up different groups of people. I don't know if you can get all 15 on a symbol or on one big call. I don't know how much Restream holds, like how many speakers will take, but I know when we've done it with Frank, we've had 4 or 5 folks on, so I think you can probably bring up groups of them, and I think it would be interesting to get to know all of them, and also for them to get to know them.
Wonderful. Yeah, man, it's gonna be more live, more view, more watch hours. It's perfect.
Love it. Perfectly aligned with your model.
Exactly. So I think do you have anything to announce, anything to say, any last word before we wrap it up and catch the flight?
Yeah, no, I gotta grab my flight. I mean, for us, like, I think, and Frank always says this, like, it'll be worth the wait. I think, like, we've got a bunch of cool stuff that we're building, stuff for DeGods, stuff for you, stuff for Dust, and I think those, 3 is the infrastructure, everything that we build for. We're all holders of all 3. Every single person that has an interest in it, holds a DeGod, holds at least one Ute, and also holds Dust. And our comp plan, so we also hold that stock. And so for us, that we take that incentive alignment to the max. And I think for us, it's the exciting stuff that we are going to launch. I think we're hoping to launch the accelerator applications in the next week or so. And then I think, talking more deeply about the roadmap, and then obviously really want to get out and talk about the bridge, right? And I think like that, the technology behind it and how we're going to approach it, I think that'll be pretty fun. And also probably a good opportunity for you to come in and interview some of the folks and talk through the choices we made and why we made them that way. But I do think that the future is bright, and
yes.
there's a bunch of stuff that we're working on and keeping us busy.
Wonderful. So yeah, looks like we have an episode 2 and 3 and maybe 4, like all schedule and lineup. That's really great. And yeah, basically, like let's end up here. That's great. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was a great show. And for everyone that watch us live, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the comments that you posted. And yeah, again, about Decoders, subscribe to the channel. It's a decentralized, the first decentralized and a community-owned YouTube channel. So by subscribing, it's basically also your own channel. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Yeah,
we'll talk soon.
Thomas, Richard, Ryan,
yes,
3you, Farmer, bunch of good guys. Yes,
thank you so much.
Yeah, coming by.
Thank you, and see you next time. Bye.